Hello friends. So if you know me, you'll know one of my favourite books and one of my favourite series of all time is Strange Case, The Alchemist Daughter by Theodore Goss. I saw a comment on my video the other day where it was like, it's not a recommendation video if Megan doesn't recommend Strange Case of the Alchemist Daughter. I feel like I was put on this earth to make you all read this book. So I love this book. I'm going to be rereading the rest of the series at the end of this year, which I'm incredibly excited for. But I want to kind of like recapture my love for this. Like I want to find how much I love this in other books, and I thought what better way to do it than to read some of the classics that this book was inspired by and read some other retellings that retell the same stories. So excited. Something I loved so much about this was the way it reimagined stories that are so within our cultural language and like reimagined them in such a fun way, like Sherlock, Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde, Dracula, Frankenstein. The way it reimagines all, I just think it's like a work of art. We know that. So in this video I'm going to be reading two classics that are inspiring this book and then two other modern retellings of some of the classics in this book. So the classics I'm going to be reading are Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. This is an anthology of some of Robert Louis Stevenson's other books, but I'm only going to read Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde because if you know Strange Case of the Alchemist Daughter, we have Mary Jekyll and Diana Hyde. Two of our main characters are the daughters of these men.
A lot of deceiving going on. A lot of deceiving.
So their story is kind of adapted in a really interesting way, and I thought it was time I read the original story. And then one of the oldest books on my TBR, I've owned this for so long, is The Adventures of Sherlock Holmes. I'm also going to be reading A Study in Scarlet via audiobook, because I know that's the first Sherlock Holmes book, but this is a bind up of the adventures and the memoirs of Sherlock Holmes. I'm only going to read the adventures, but I am so excited. I've wanted to read Sherlock Holmes for a long time. Evidently I've owned this probably like 5 years or something. But as a lover of mystery, I'm very excited to see some of the earliest mysteries, the earliest inspiration for mysteries. And Sherlock is one of, it's might be what I'm most interested in reading, because Sherlock is like such a well-known character and has been adapted in so many different ways that I'm really excited to see how the original Sherlock compares to the Sherlock in Strange Case, The Alchemist Daughter. And then the retellings I'm going to be reading, part of what inspired this video, this is probably the inspiration for this video, was The Daughter of Dr. Moreau by Sylvia Moreno Garcia. So if you, I should hold up Strange Case because I keep talking about it. My favourite character in this is Catherine Moreau, and she's not the daughter, but I feel like we could have some similarities in this. I've never read the original Dr. Moreau story, The Island of Dr. Moreau I think it's called, but when I saw this come out and I recognised the name and I was like, Sylvia, you're gonna write like another version of my favourite character of all time, I have to read it. So this is kind of what inspired this video. And then I'm also going to be reading The Dark Descent of Elizabeth Frankenstein. I don't know much about this book. I was asking, I wanted another retelling that retold some of the other stories, and my patrons recommended this one. So that's all we're going to be reading in this vlog, and I'm kind of going to be comparing how their adaptations or the portrayals of characters in each of these books compare to the portrayals in Strange Case. I think this is a fun, these are all like gothic-esque books, I guess, the inspo is at least, so it's going to be a fun kind of autumnal activity to bring us into autumn. But I'm very excited. I don't know why I'm going to start. You'll find out in approximately 2 seconds, so let's just get on with it. The proof stands before you, said Catherine. Am I human? I don't know. I have a name, Catherine, given to me by Montgomery. As a joke, Catherine, cat in here. There's a cat in here. She pulled up the sleeves of her dress. On her arms, too, they could see a regular pattern of scars, faint but visible in the lamplight, like a network of roads over her body. Okie dokie, so I am halfway through The Daughter of Dr. Moreau by Sylvia Moreno Garcia. So in The Strange Case of the Alchemist Daughter, we have Catherine Moreau. So as soon as I saw this book come out, I was like, because if you don't know, Catherine is probably my favourite character from Strange Case.
That's real. Even though she's fictional, it's real, and that's important to me.
So she is the one who's writing the story of the girl. She's like very like no bullshit. I just love her. I have like a strong love in my heart for Catherine. But there is a bit of a difference between these two. So Catherine is not the daughter of Dr. Moreau. She is the final creation of Dr. Moreau. So if you've ever heard of the original story by H.G. Wells, I think it is, the last creature made is the half-made puma woman, and that's who Catherine is. Whereas in this is like the actual daughter of Dr. Moreau, Carlotta. But one kind of similarity is that she's ill, and so she has to be injected with like jaguar essence. So puma, jaguar, are they that far apart?
connected the two dots.
You didn't connect shit, but
I've connected them.
But in terms of characteristic, they are very different. Carlotta is very subservient, is that the right word? Like, she's very meek. She obeys her dad. She wants to obey all the men in her life. She wants to do the right thing for her family. Catherine's headstrong, no bullshit, takes no prisoners, but like is a softie at heart. I love her. So this is such an interesting reading experience, guys. I've never done anything like this before. I mean, I have not read the original story. Like, for some in this video, obviously we're going to be reading the originals. This is me reading another retelling and seeing how they compare. And I don't love Carlotta as much as I love Catherine, but that's like, you know, that would be an impossible standard to uphold. In terms of the book itself, I struggled the first 20 pages. I was like, Jesus Christ, I'm not enjoying this. You know when your eyes just like scan the page, you're not actually reading, like you're not, you know, when a book and a writing style or whatever like does not compute with your brain, like you just can't, sometimes it just happens for no reason and you can't predict why. Like your brain is just like, I don't know her. Refusing to engage. That's how it felt at the beginning of this. But one of my patrons, I started on Patreon reading experience last night, and one of them recommended the audiobook, and I picked the audiobook up and I'm really, really enjoying the audiobook, and it's like turned around the book for me. I'm enjoying it. In this one we are following Carlotta, but we're also following the other perspective is Montgomery, who I think is in the original story. I think he's mentioned in this as well. He's like the butler of her dad. It's a slow burn. The dad is similar, again, he's making these hybrids. Dad's a little bit sus. I think this paints a more nuanced picture of Dr. Moreau than other books. I don't know, it doesn't have him as quite, you know, or this book, and I assume the original story he's like a villain almost, or he definitely is in this book, whereas like he is her dad who she loves in this book, but also, you know, he's making these hybrids, and in this one he's making them so they can go work on like plantations as slaves, because like humans aren't allowed to be slaves anymore, so like this is like the next answer to that. But I just think it's an interesting portrayal of him, and I'm enjoying it. I'm enjoying the writing style. I've got more into it, but it's definitely a very slow burn of a book. I don't think it's my favourite Silver Garcia, but I think Mexican Gothic for me is the best. But I think this will rank above Velvet Was the Night for me. I think this is a very mature way of exploring like abuse of power, of social inequality, but like doing it in not a overt way. I don't know, discussing those topics in a very subtle way. So I'm enjoying it. I'm gonna go finish it. Hopefully I will finish it today. I'm really enjoying the audiobook, but she's not quite Catherine. But I just think it's interesting to see different ways that these books have adapted the same story. Hi cuties, how are you doing? Sorry if my hair looks crazy. I just took it down from a crazy bun that it was in. It hasn't really resettled. So I actually kept my word this time. So often in vlogs I say, oh, I hope I'm gonna read to this point tonight and check in with you tonight, or I hope I'm gonna finish this today, and never do. And I actually read it and finished this today. In terms of rating, I'm gonna give it a 3.5. Maybe closer to a 3, maybe like more like 3.25. Unfortunately, this does remind me more of Velvet Was the Night than it does Mexican Gothic, because there's something about both these books where like they're beautifully written and you can see what it's trying to say and you think it's making those points so well, but like you kind of don't care.
It's the truth.
You kind of don't care about the characters, you kind of don't care about the plot. I'm not invested, right? And that's a difficult thing to rate when you can recognize the worth of a book, but like your enjoyment isn't necessarily there. Also, something that happens in both these is there's like emotions, unresolved emotions. It's a theme I'm noticing a lot. That's really like Garcia likes to. She likes to tease a romance and it just go nowhere. And I know that's kind of the point. I know she's trying to do something different, but like do it once.
I agree. I've had it. And
You know what I've had?
It.
I just have had enough with like bittersweet, unresolved, complex relationship dynamics. Like just give me something easy, Sylvia. Give me something easier. So I'm kind of sad about that. But I do just want to say, I don't want to spoil where this book goes because it does go in a slightly different direction in the latter half. But there is a character in this who is, let's say, a mother figure who is named Theodora. Sylvia, did you read Strange Case and get inspired? And that's like a little homage? I've connected the dots.
It's a conspiracy theory that I'm actually interested in.
I mean, doing this video is just making me want to read Strange Case again. Maybe I'll reread all 3 books at the end of this year, because I have reread this first one once. But maybe I'll reread all of them. But it was an interesting book. But it's difficult. I can recognise... I'm starting to become worried Silver Garcia isn't actually 100% author for me, and I just love Mexican Gothic because it's a theme. We're 2 out of 3 where like I can recognise the value of a book, but I personally am bored. I was bored. I was not interested. I was bored. So, like I said, you know, what this is saying about oppression and abuse of power and particularly like male-female dynamics in power at this time in history. I think this, and what it's saying about reimagining the tale of the island of Dr. Moreau with these other political factors in it, I think is great. But I didn't care. So anyways, glad I've read it. Another book I pre-ordered and didn't love. Great, well done, Megan. Now we are going to start The Adventures of Sherlock Holmes. Oh my god. I'm going to listen to the Stephen Fry audiobooks, and I'm going to read A Study in Scarlet first, because I know that isn't in this collection, and that's the first Sherlock Holmes book. And then I'm going to read, if you've heard me say before that this is split into adventures and memoirs, I'm only going to read The Adventures of Sherlock Holmes. But I'm excited. I'm just so intrigued to see how the true Sherlock, will compare to the Sherlock in this. I know it'll be a very different story. The Sherlock in this is quite level 1 Sherlock, I think, but I love him, and how it compares to other adaptations of Sherlock I have seen throughout the years. And then said, "It's important, Mr. Holmes." Another shot, and then, "All right, let her in." The voice implied that whoever she was, she would be an infernal nuisance. The man in the middle of the room was holding a pistol. He was tall, with a high forehead and the sort of nose they call aquiline. He looked, Mary thought, like an inquisitive eagle. His shirt sleeves were rolled up, and he was pointing the pistol at the wall. Hello, friends. It's been a day. It's been a day and a half. And it's been a stressful day. But it's all good. Just busy. But I have read A Study in Scarlet by Arthur Conan Doyle, and this was very interesting. So this is the first Sherlock Holmes book. It was the first published, and I really enjoyed this. I was shocked at how much I enjoyed this. Like, I thought I'd enjoy it, but I wasn't expecting to enjoy it as much as I did. I'm giving it 4 stars. It's actually quite an easy 4-star because the first half of this was 5-star, 5-star, 5-star. Like, I was obsessed. I loved Sherlock. I loved the writing. We'll get into all of that in a second. But if you don't know, A Study in Scarlet switches halfway to a completely different setting that really goes into the backstory of, like, the characters involved in the murder that Sherlock is solving. And, like, I was bored. That was more like a 3-star. So I'm settling on a 4, but most of what I'm reflecting on, I think, is that first half, because that's the half that Sherlock is mostly in. And I loved it.
It's so amazing, and I would play it again and again and again.
I could not believe, firstly, how readable it was. So, granted, I am listening to the Stephen Fry audiobooks. If you don't know, Stephen Fry has done a ton of audiobooks. I was going to say here in the UK, but I guess for everyone. He's done a series, a very popular series that we shall not mention, but he's very infamous for having done their audiobooks. I think everyone loves Stephen Fry as an audiobook narrator, right? He does a history series on Audible that I listen to. He's done Victorian, Edwardians, and now he's on the 20s, and I've just started that. So I love him as a narrator, so that helps. But I don't know why I was expecting Sherlock Holmes to have more, like, old-timey language, but I suppose, like, you've got to remember Arthur Conan Doyle was alive when Agatha Christie was alive. Like, granted, I think he was older than her. Like, I think of him as Victorian and her as, like, 1920s, but, like, those times aren't that far apart. Because obviously when she went missing, he, like, tried to help solve her disappearance. And Sherlock, it was so fascinating, right, to read proper Sherlock for the first time, having obviously read him in this, but obviously having consumed so much Sherlock, you know, media, in the wider media. Like, I loved the BBC Sherlock series. I was obsessed with that. I was like 12, I feel like, when it came out, and it was so good. Those first couple of seasons actually bang. That show bangs. If you've never watched it, go watch it. The one with Benedict Cumberbatch is so good. And I was surprised by actually how much more I feel like the adaptation of Sherlock adhered to, like, the BBC version of Sherlock, where he's kind of, like, erratic and, like, enthusiastic and, like, jumping around from place to place, rather than in this. This is like, he's basically Sherlock just in name. Because in this book, I think it is very important that the girls are the star of the show. When you have a character like Sherlock who's been adapted so many times and, like, everyone knows so well, it's important he doesn't steal the show, and that's very difficult. Like, I feel like Sherlock always steals the show. So in this, Sherlock is not as erratic, he's not addicted to drugs, he's not, you know, here, there and everywhere. Like, this Sherlock is much more calm. I think he still has a little bit of quirk, but I mean, he's like a love interest for our main character, and he's very much toned down. And so this Sherlock in The Strange Case of Alchemist's Daughter is not, I don't really think, like the main Sherlock. I really enjoyed, I found it so fascinating reading this, and reading the first Sherlock book, which was really the originator. Yes, books existed before this, like Edgar Allan Poe I think is credited with having written the first mystery, but Sherlock Holmes is really what popularized the mystery genre. And as someone who loves mysteries, like mystery is my favorite genre, I just found this so beyond fascinating to read. I loved it. I loved the experience of reading this. I just listened to the audiobook. Stephen Fry was doing a great narration. I loved already beginning to see the relationship between Sherlock and Watson. I really enjoyed this. Like I said, that first half was like 5 star for me. But I have made a controversial decision. I'm not gonna read The Adventures of Sherlock Holmes. Okay, I feel like for the purposes of this video and seeing how this Sherlock compares to the original Sherlock, I've like read what I need to, and I'd just be reading, like, A Study in Scarlet is classed as a book. It's like a 200-ish page book when it's put into a physical book. And so I feel like I'd just be reading this for the sake of it. And yes, I do want to read it, but also I've got my whole life, and hopefully I'm living for a long time, touch wood. I've got my whole life to read Sherlock Holmes. Do you know what I mean? Like, I don't feel like I need to rush it. And I'm just, so often when I make vlogs, I very rarely ever renege on what my original promise for a TBR is going to be. Like, I've said it and I'm going to stick to it, and I'm a completionist. But this time I'm just going to listen to myself, and I don't feel like I need to read this now.
The rules don't apply.
I feel like I would enjoy this more if I were to like dip in and read The Adventures of Sherlock Holmes at a different moment in life, when like I don't want to read it all in one go. Do you know what I mean? That's how I'm feeling. So actually I'm not going to read this. I feel like I've read my Sherlock need already. So this book, that is one of the oldest books on my TBR, goes back on the shelf. But now, having now read A Study in Scarlet, I am just really excited to get to this. But I just feel like I want to pace myself. Important question. Do I need to count Sherlock Holmes as a series? Do I need to count Sherlock Holmes as a series? Because I don't want to. So if I can get away with not, I will not. But am I bending the rules? Is Sherlock Holmes technically a series? Would you count like Study in Scarlet as number 1, A Sign of 4 as 2, this is like Adventures of Sherlock Holmes is number 3, A Memoir of Sherlock Holmes is number 4? Like, is it a series, or are they seen as more like standalones in the Sherlock Holmes universe? Let me know. But next I'm going to start The Dark Descent of Elizabeth Frankenstein, my other like retelling in this video, and I'm intrigued. I've never really heard anyone speak about this, but I am intrigued to see, because I think the Justine Frankenstein in this book is going to be quite different. I'm not expecting them to be similar, but I'm just interested to see how this book adapts Frankenstein and go from there. So yeah, I'm gonna go start this tonight, and I'll probably check in with you in the morning once I've read a good amount of this. But my father told me my history, how I was sent in service to his family when I was no older than Alice, how I was treated well as part of the Frankenstein family, how his mother loved me, and how I was considered almost a sister by his cousin Elizabeth, who had lived with the Frankensteins since she was a child. I was trained as a nursemaid for the Frankenstein boys, first for his younger brother Ernest and then for the youngest William. Victor, the eldest, was already in school and soon to depart for university. He told me that I was a happy girl, always laughing, with golden hair and eyes like the sky above Lausanne in the summer. Alright, so I am halfway through The Dark Descent of Elizabeth Frankenstein. It's fine. I'm not quite halfway through. I'm up to the end of part 1, so I've just started part 2, so I figured that would be a good place to stop. Now, in terms of similarities to The Strange Case of the Alchemist's Daughter, I'm not going to get into Justine's entire backstory in this, because I don't think you find it out until like right at the end of the book, so like you don't need to know. I like don't want to get into spoiler territory really, but Justine is in this book. She is Elizabeth's closest friend, and she is a nursemaid to the Frankenstein family, which is the same as in the original, and it's the same in this. I think at the start of her retelling her story, she's like, oh yeah, I was a nursemaid to the Frankenstein family, da 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 da. So she is across like all 3 books, right, Justine, but she's different. Not really, the character isn't the same. She's a bit more meek and like kind and like gentle soul and loves everyone in this book, whereas Justine in this one is quiet and reserved, but out of kind of like, I don't know how, she has this gravitas to her, Justine in this one. She has like this, I think of her as wise, you know? So it's interesting to see like the same character, although she isn't like the focus of this book, she's kind of like the backing character. I don't think Elizabeth Frankenstein, because Elizabeth Frankenstein is Frankenstein's wife to my recollection in the original. I've never read the original Frankenstein, but my main point with this is that I'm kind of glad that I haven't read the original Frankenstein, because I think I'd be really bored.
Bored shitless!
I think I'd be even more, I'm not bored. It's easy to read, but like I think I'd be even more like, okay, if I had read the original, because I don't know if this is necessarily doing anything new. It's kind of going where I predict it to go. Elizabeth is an interesting character because she's very manipulative. She's gonna do what she wants to do to like achieve the aim that she wants to achieve. But like she's kind of a product of her surroundings. She's had zero familial security her whole life, and her entire security depends on pleasing Victor Frankenstein and obeying to his whims and making him happy and making him want the things that she wants, so that's how she gets them. So she's a very interesting character. I'm liking the atmosphere. You know, I think it's got that gothic atmosphere really down to a T. But when comparing it, because obviously these retellings I'm reading to compare to how much I enjoy them in comparison to how much I enjoyed this being a retelling. And what I feel like Strange Case the Alchemist Daughter does, and the whole series does, that I love, is that it finds the perfect balance between paying homage to the original stories but adapting them in a way that makes sense for this book, and like not being constrained by some of the things that happened in the other original stories if they doesn't need to be, or changing the characters a little bit, or just adapting it in a way that finds that perfect balance. And this one feels like it's sticking too close to the original text to me to be its own book.
I mean, all I can do is be honest with my feelings.
I don't think it's bad. I think the writing is fine. I think that the atmosphere is nice, but I kind of know, I feel like, you know, there's a few routes this could go down and they're all going to be fairly predictable. So I don't know. It's not bad, but it's not incredible is my, you know, overwhelming feeling towards this. We'll see if that changes. I am listening to the audiobook as well, just to like get through, because I'm not really in a reading mood. But we'll see. We'll see what I think of the second half of this. Hey. Okay, I finished The Dark Descent of Elizabeth Frankenstein. I'm gonna give this a 2.5. Okay. It wasn't that I think this is bad, it's just that there's nothing I particularly liked about it. And I've realised it's because I have the same issue with this as I do Greek myth retellings, right? Where this is a retelling that it feels like wanted to stick really closely, until maybe the end, stick really closely to the original source material and the original beats of the story and key points that happen in the story, and it just doesn't lend itself to a natural character arc.
That's my opinion!
I'm sorry, I don't like it. I think what I love so much about this is that you have the characters, you have some of their influences, some of their storylines, but really it's a new story. Maybe I just like fan fiction. I don't like retellings, I like fan fiction. Because yeah, there were moments, particularly in the second, from when I last spoke to you in part 2 of this, where the story just felt so slow and it dragged, and it felt like certain things had to happen that happened in the original book that just make no sense for this storyline and what this book is trying to do. Like, I wish it had just shed the confines of the original story somewhat. I don't think I like retellings that stick really closely to all the plot beats of the original source material. I also do think, actually, I mean, this is only, it's 280 pages. I think it's too long. I think if this had been about the 200 page mark, it would have been much stronger. It dragged, girl. It dragged. I think in that first section, the pacing was really good. Those first 120 pages. But then in the second section, barely anything happened. I couldn't tell you what made up more than half of this book. So that's my big problems with this. Why it's a 2.5. That I didn't like how it felt constrained by original plot beats, and I felt like it was too long. But like, I don't think it's bad. I can understand why someone would enjoy this. I just feel like I'm picky. I'm too picky these days. But in reality, to make me love you, you just have to like kind of be fan fiction of characters rather than telling the original story. I don't know, like I thinking about aspects of Justine's backstory in this that obviously divert from the original storyline that I love. There's certain things that happen to her that I don't want to spoil anything, but I love the imagery of, and just I feel like added so much to her character that, yeah, made me sad, guys. So anyways, I'm gonna go read I guess it's kind of like a short story, Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde. It's only takes up to page like 75 in this. So I'm gonna go read this. Other than Strange Case, my only cultural reference of Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde, or my first actually, my initial introduction to Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde was the Backstreet Boys in Backstreet's Back. Yeah, because one of them dresses up as Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde, and he's like, "Am I original? Yeah." And he's like, the two creatures. Anyways, I'm gonna go read this. I'm not holding out hope that I'm gonna love it. I'm just gonna read this tonight. So I'm gonna see you before I have a bath, because I'm gonna read this and then have a bath tonight. I'm not holding out hope I'm gonna love it, but it's interesting. It's gonna be interesting to read the classic and see what kind of all this imagery has come from. "Why, miss," said Mrs. Poole, "everything was burned after your father's death. I still remember that night, although it was so long ago. My father and Mr. Utterson breaking down the door to the office, and then my father telling all the servants that Dr. Jekyll was dead. An accident, he told us, but we all whispered the word suicide. The next day, Mr. Utterson and my father carried him out themselves, in a plain wooden box. They made us certain it must have been a suicide. Why else were none of the servants invited to the funeral? After that, everything was cleared away. All the chemicals, the papers, even the books." Okie dokie. So I just read the entirety of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, and I'm sure we all know the story vaguely. I don't need to give you a synopsis. My prevailing feeling is this would have been a gag, like such a gag to read back in the day when you didn't know the spoiler. Like now we all know what Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde mean. Like it's almost a synonym for like split personality, or like, you know, people going like back and forth between personalities. So we all know the deal. But I imagine reading this for the first time and not knowing that was going to be the reveal. Oh my god, a gag. A gag. Robert Louis Stevenson, you did that.
You ate that.
In terms of my enjoyment though, I'm gonna give it a 3.5. I enjoyed it. If you don't know the structure of the book, the like first half, we're kind of reading from this lawyer's perspective, and it's just a bit dry, right? But then there's this last, how long of the short story is this section? Let's see. Okay, so the last like 16 pages, it's only 75 pages, so the last 16 pages of it is like a letter from Dr. Jekyll's perspective, and that was like 5 stars. The drama of this narration I loved, but the rest was like a 3, and it's only like a small portion, so it's like I'm giving it a 3.5 running up to a 4 on Goodreads. You know, that's the vibe of this for me. I enjoyed it. I think also with these kind of gothic classic Victorian texts, you know, I think of this, I think, what else have I read? Dracula, Sherlock I'd put in a separate box, but like these kind of books, I feel like, and stories, I feel like are greater than the sum of their parts. You know, when you have a series, for example, where like you give the book, you may give one a 5-star, one a 4-star, one a 4.5, another a 4, like a long series, right? Although you haven't given many of the books in that series 5 stars, you think of it as like a 5-star series. I feel like this kind of subsection of literature for me is kind of like that, where when I read the individual things, I'm like, that was okay, you know, but when I think of them as a whole, I'm like, God, what a moment. That's history, you know what I mean? So it's tricky. I think of them as, I think of their influence, I think of their imagery, I think of the atmosphere, I think of the vibe as like a 5-star, but when I read the things individually, they're not necessarily a 5-star. So that's my prevailing thing, but I'm glad I finally read it. Listen, it's only a short story, and I think it's kind of like just putting myself in the shoes of someone reading that for the first time. A gag. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed this video. I'm sorry, I feel like this vlog, I just don't feel as good about it as other vlogs. I don't know why, I haven't edited it yet, so maybe I'll feel differently then. But I've just had some other stuff going on this week that have asked more of me than like things in my life usually do. Do you know what I mean? I've had to give more of myself to other things versus working on this vlog. And so I just feel like my head hasn't been in it as much as my head. Usually when I'm doing a vlog, I'm like fucking locked and loaded, I'm not thinking about anything else. Whereas I've had to put my attention elsewhere a little bit this week. So I hope that hasn't come across. And if you're kind of bored in this vlog, like, don't hold it against me because things will be different in the next vlog. The vibes are off a bit, that's why. But I hope you enjoyed this video and I will see you very soon in another one. Bye!